Welcome back to another episode of Mr. Matthew Reads for You. We're going to dip back in to one of Miss Pepperpot's classic stories for you. Remember, this book is for years 7 and upwards. It's a very old tales from about 1959, but these are classics, and sometimes the classics are as good as anything new. Today, I'm going to read to you The Nature Lesson. Every morning, when Mrs. Pepperpot sits at her window with her after-breakfast cup of coffee, she watches a little boy who always walks across her yard on his way to school. The boy's name is Ollie, and he and Mrs. Pepperpot are very good friends, though not in the way grown-ups usually are friends with children. Quite often, Ollie rushes past Mrs. Pepperpot's window without even saying good morning, because he is in such a hurry. But then, Mrs. Pepperpot has never even asked him his name, or how old he is, or what he wants for Christmas. She just watches him every morning and says to herself, "There goes the little boy on his way to school." As for Ollie, he just glances up at her window and thinks, "There's the old woman drinking her coffee." Now with animals, it is different. If Ollie sees the cat sitting on Mrs. Pepperpot's doorstep, he can't resist to stop to stroke her. He'll even sit down on the doorstep and talk to her. "Hello, little cat," he'll say. "You are a lovely little cat." And then, of course, he has to go and see the dog outside his kennel as well, in case he should get jealous. "Hello, boy. Good dog, good dog. You didn't think I'd forgotten you, did you?" "Oh, I wouldn't do that. There's a good dog." And by the time he's made a fuss of them both, he's late for school. This is Ollie's trouble. He's very fond of animals. He loves to play hide and seek with the squirrel he sees on the way to school, or to have a whistling match with a blackbird. And as for rainy days, well, he spends so much time trying not to step on the worms wriggling by the puddles in the road that he's always late for school. This won't do, of course. And when he's late, his teachers get cross. And she'll say, "It's all very well being fond of animals, it's quite right that you should be, but it's no excuse for being late to school." But that wasn't what I was going to tell you. What I was going to tell you was how Mrs. Pepperpot had a nature lesson one day. So here we go. It was a lovely spring day, and Mrs. Pepperpot was sitting by the window as usual, enjoying her cup of coffee and watching Ollie come across the yard. He was walking rather briskly this time, watching some bird or animal, and probably that made him late again. So he had only time to say, "Hello, little cat," to the cat on the doorstep, and "Hi, boy," to the dog by the kennel. But suddenly he stopped, turned round on his heel, and started running back across the yard. Mrs. Pepperpot had just come to the door to give the dog his breakfast, and Ollie rushed past her as fast as he could go. Mrs. Pepperpot called to him. "Whatever's the matter with you, boy? The police after you?" "Forgot my nature textbook," answered Ollie over his shoulder, and started off again. "Wait a minute," called Mrs. Pepperpot. Ollie stopped. "You can't go all the way home now. You'll be much too late for school." No, you go on, and I'll go back for your book, and I'll bring it to school for you." Ollie shuffled his feet a bit and looked unhappy. He didn't much like the idea of an old woman turning up in school with his nature textbook. "Don't stand there shuffling, boy," said Mrs. Pepperpot. "Where did you leave the book?" "On the windowsill," he answered. "The window is open." "All right. Where do you want me to put the book when I come to school?" "Come on, hurry up, we haven't got all day," said Mrs. Pepperpot, trying to look severe. "Well, there's a hole in the wall, just by the big birch tree. There's an old bird nest there that you can put it in." "In the old nest in a hole, in the wall by the birch tree. Right," said Mrs. Pepperpot. "Now off you go and see if you can be on time for a change. I'll see to the rest." "Righto," said Ollie, and was off before you could say Jack Robinson. Mrs. Pepperpot took off her apron, smoothed her hair, and stepped out into the yard. And then, of course, the inevitable thing happened. She shrank. This is bad, thought Mrs. Pepperpot, as she peeped over the wet grass by the doorstep. But I've known worse. She called to the cat. Come on here, little cat. You'll have to be my horse once again and help me fetch Ollie's nature book from his house. Meow. All right, said the cat, as she allowed Mrs. Pepperpot to climb on her back. What sort of thing is a nature book? Well, it's a book the children use in school to learn about animals, answered Mrs. Pepperpot. And one thing it says about cats is that you are carnivores. Oh, what does that mean? Asked the cat. Well, that you eat meat. But never mind that now. All you have to do is take me straight down the road till we get to the stream. Then we take a shortcut across. But as they came near to the stream, the cat said, Doesn't the book say anything about cats not liking to get their feet wet? And then she stopped abruptly. So abruptly that Mrs. Pepperpot toppled right over her head and fell plump into the water. Good job I can swim, spluttered Mrs. Pepperpot as she came to the surface. Humans aren't meant to live underwater on account of the way they breathe with their lungs. Phew, it's hard work all the same. I'll take a rest on this stone and see if something turns up. While she was getting her breath, a tiny animal stuck its nose out of the water and started snarling at her. Now, Mrs. Pepperpot knew what that was, but you probably wouldn't, because it lives in a faraway place, and it's called a lemming. Its fur is dappled brown and fawn, so that it looks a bit like a guinea pig in summer, but in the winter it turns white as the snow around it. As I say, Mrs. Pepperpot knew all about lemmings, so she snarled back at the little creature, making as horrible a noise as she could. I'm not afraid of you, she said. Though the book says you're the worst tempered of all the little rodents and don't give way to fierce dogs or even a grown man. But now you can just stop showing off and help me out of this stream like a good lemming. Well, blow me, said the lemming. I never saw a woman as small as you and with such a loud voice. Get on my back and I'll take you across. Where are you going, by the way? To fetch a nature book from the house over there for a little boy at school, said Mrs. Pepperpot. And in that book there is quite a bit about you. Oh, and what does it say? Asked the lemming, crawling out onto the grass with Mrs. Pepperpot. It says that once every so many years lemmings come down from the mountains in great swarms and they eat up all the green stuff they can find till they get to the sea. Then she stopped because she remembered that when the lemmings reach the sea in search for food, thousands of them get drowned. We do get rather hungry, said the lemming. As a matter of fact, I'm on my way now to join my mates for a little food hunt. Could you just take me down to the house? Pleaded Mrs. Pepperpot. She didn't like the idea that he might drown in the sea, but the lemming's empty tummy was telling him to go. So he told Mrs. Pepperpot she would have to manage by herself, and he ran off, muttering to himself about juicy green leaves. Before Mrs. Pepperpot had time to wonder what would happen to him, another head appeared above the little wall. This time it was a stoat. Hello, Mr. Nosy Parker, she greeted him. What are you looking for? I thought you were a mouse, but I see you're a little old woman, and I don't eat women, said the stoat. Have you by any chance got a silver spoon? He added. I have something you'll like even better than silver spoons, answered Mrs. Pepperpot. A whole packet of tin tacks. And you can have them if you'll take me to that house over there. I have to fetch a book from the windowsill for a little boy in school. All right, said the stoat, hop up. So Mrs. Pepperpot got on his back. But it was the most uncomfortable journey, because stoats, like weasels, move by rippling their long bodies. And though they have short legs, they can run very fast. Mrs. Pepperpot had a job keeping on and was glad when they reached the wall under the window. The stoat scrambled up to the windowsill, and presently he came back with the book, under his chin. "Why do you carry the book that way?" asked Mrs. Pepperpot. "Well, how else?" answered the Stoat. "I always carry eggs under my chin." "Eggs?" Mrs. Pepperpot pretended to be surprised. "I didn't know a stoat laid eggs." "Ha ha, very funny," said the Stoat. "I suppose you don't eat eggs." "Oh yes," said Mrs. Pepperpot, "but I don't steal them out of wild birds' nests." "That's my business," said the Stoat. "Now you'd better think how you're going to get this book to school. I can't carry both you and the book." "That's true," said Mrs. Pepperpot. "Well, I'll have to think of something." But it wasn't necessary. For the next moment, Mrs. Pepperpot was back to her proper size. As she bent down to pick up the book, she whispered to the little Stoat, "The tin tacks will be waiting for you in that nest you robbed in the stone wall by the school." And she thought she heard him chuckle as he rippled away down the grass. When she reached the school, the bell was ringing for break, and she just had time to pop the book into the empty nest before Ollie came running out with the other children. Mrs. Pepperpot gave the tiniest nod in the direction of the wall, and then she walked briskly away. But the next morning, Ollie brought a lovely bone for her dog, a milk bottle that he poured in a good saucerful for her little cat. Mrs. Pepperpot opened the window. "Would you do something for me this morning?" she asked. "As long as it won't make me late for school," answered Ollie. "Good," said Mrs. Pepperpot. Then she fetched a packet of tin tacks from the tool shed and gave them to Ollie. "Put these in the empty nest in the wall, will you? They're for a friend of mine." And that's the end of another Mrs. Pepperpot story. I do hope that you're enjoying these readings. We're going to keep doing them. We're going to keep reading different books as well. And I've even persuaded a few of my colleagues to start doing it too. So it won't just be Mr. Matthew reads to you, but many more of my colleagues doing this too. I hope that they're helping you with distance learning, and I most importantly hope that they're still giving you a love for reading and books, because wherever you are, whatever you're doing, please keep reading. It's so important. Thank you very much, and I'll see you next time.